I'm Dr. Kristen R. Bromley. This video series, which is part of my online music academy, specifically accompanies Note Reading Book 3 from my Method book series. Like all my books, this selection is available to purchase through Amazon and Google Play. For help, see the links in the description below. In the videos which are part of this specific course, I progress through the lessons in Note Reading Book 3, explaining and demonstrating concepts and playing each of the songs and exercises contained therein, so you can hear how they sound and play them right along with me. You are of course welcome to view these videos with or without the book, but with the book you can work through all the songs and exercises, and in the process come to know the entire fretboard and master the skill of playing written notes all along the neck. Alright, let's get to jamming in this lesson. Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Bromley. Welcome back. This is lesson 21 that goes with Note Reading Book 3. In this lesson, we're working on the keys of E flat major and C minor. So we'll go ahead and dive in right there on page 179, starting off with the single octave scale exercise for the E flat major scale. Now, there's a few different ways that we can play this one. I'm going to go ahead and go through those and then we'll play it. So we've got an E flat at the 11th fret of the 6th string. I can do scale form 1 there. Alternatively, if I put my pinky on that E flat, I could do scale form 2. Then on the 5th string, I have an E flat at the 6th fret. I could do scale form 1. Or alternatively, I could do scale form 2 if I stick my pinky there. That's all the options that we have in this particular range, so I'm going to go ahead and play this one. I'm going to do it in 5th position, so my middle finger's on that E flat at the 6th fret on the 5th string. We're in 3/4 time. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, let's flip on over to page 180 and do this an octave higher. So with E flat, starting on the 4th string at the 13th fret, we've got scale form 1. So we could play this one there. We could also alternatively play it with scale form 2 if I start with my pinky. We've also got an E flat on the 3rd string at the 8th fret, and we can play it there. I'm going to go ahead and play it there. So we're going to have 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, and we'll go ahead and look at the minor scales then. So with the minor scales, in the range of number 3, we've got an option of using right in 8th position with my index on the C at the 8th fret on the 6th string. We've got scale form 1 there. Alternatively, we could also do scale form 2 there. And then on the 5th string, with our index finger at the 3rd fret, we have scale form 1. Scale form 2 doesn't work without open strings in that case. And any other options for this range, we don't have any. So with this range, those are the options we have. I'm going to go ahead and use scale form 2 in the 5th position. So my pinky's on the C at the 8th fret. So I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, now let's look over on page 181. We'll go up an octave. We'll see the options we have here. So, with this one, we actually could play in 15th position with scale form 1. It's kind kind of high and awkward. There's better places to do it, but I pointed that out because we have scale form 2 there. If I put my pinky on that C at the 15th fret on that 5th string, we also have, if I put my index finger on the C that's at the 10th fret on the 4th string, scale form 1 there in this range. And we could alternatively do scale form 2. And then up on the 3rd fret, or the 3rd string, 5th fret, I've got scale form 1 there. I'm going to go ahead and read it there. So you're going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, let's look at these positional forms then. So starting on the bottom of page 181, we're in position 3, starting with the C minor scale. So I've got my index finger, and alternatively it might be easier sometimes to find the major scale first, but the positions are the same for the minor scale and the major scale. So the major root would be the E flat with our pinky on the 6th fret, but the minor root for the minor scale is on that 3rd fret with this position. So you can run through that scale if you need to. And we'll go ahead and read number 5. This has some 16th notes. I'm going to take it a little bit slower. 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, we'll flip on over to page 182 and do the major E flat major scale exercise here. So we're going to go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... page 183, we'll play these melodies. So I'm going to give us 1 and 2, and then we'll come in on the and in the pickup measure for Cindy. 1 and 2. And we'll do St. Louis Blues. This one has some accidentals, so you gotta watch for that. So you got like a B natural and then a G flat right there in the second measure. So you just want to find the closest one depending on where you're fingering something. So in the case of this first one, it may be helpful to grab the B and then slide up to the C on that second measure. Do it something like that. So you just find the closest one that you can. There's F sharp later on, which should be easy to find right there at the 4th fret of the 4th string, that sort of thing. We got an A natural up on the top string. So you just find the closest one. The G flat we've got there could go down to that 2nd fret on that 1st string, or the 7th fret on the 2nd string, so you got different options. With this one, as I'm playing it, because it goes from the old blues and even jazz tradition, I'm going to swing the rhythm, and what that means is I'm going to push the 8th notes on the offbeats a little bit back into the beat further than exactly between the beat, so it'll be kind of nice like this. So we'll do it kind of like that. 1, 2, I want to ready and Okay, super fun melody. Let's turn on over to page 184. We're going to be up in 5th and 6th position now. I got my middle finger for the E flat on the 6th fret of the 5th string. I got scale form 1, scale form 2, back to scale form 1. So we're going to go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... And we'll go on over to page 185 and do the minor scale exercise now in that same position. So starting with that pinky. So we're going to 1 and 2 and ready and go and. Okay, let's do these melodies then. So I'm going to give us a 3-beat count in for L'Aquamond. We go 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we'll flip on over to page 186. We've got the Erie Canal. 1, 2, ready, and. I swung the rhythm on that one if you didn't notice, but it kind of fits that style, fits that song. Okay, so on to the next position now. We're going to be in 7th and 8th position with E flat major here. I got my pinky on the E flat that is at the 11th fret. Got scale form 2 and then scale form 1. This one has a lot of 16th notes, so take it nice and easy. 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, and we'll look at the minor scale exercise in this position, number 14. So you got 1 and 2 and ready and go and. Okay, and we'll go on over to page 188. Play these melodies. So you got 1, 2, ready, and. And we'll do Midnight Special. Oh, it was 3, 4, 1, and we'll be in 3, 4, 1. And we'll do Fowler. I'll give us a 3-beat count in 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go on and do Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. I'll give us 3, 1, 2, and we'll be in. 3, 1, 2. Okay, we'll go over to page 189 and we'll do the next position. So we're going to start with E flat major in 10th position. I got my middle finger on the 11th fret on that E flat note on the 6th string. Scale form 1 to scale form 2. And in this one we've got that note that's just below the root and a second up above the root on top. So 2 extra notes outside the 2 octaves. We're in 3/4 time. I'll give us a 3-beat counting. 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, and we'll go on over to page 190 and do the minor scale exercise now. So we're going to have 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, let's do these melodies, starting with number 21. So we're going to 1, 2, ready, and... And we'll do my Redeemer. This has got a lot of triplets, so I'm going to count it off that way with 1 and 2 and then we'll be in 1 and 2 and Let's go over to page 191. We'll do Get Along Little Doggies. I'll give us 3, 1, 2, and we'll be in. 3, 1, 2. Okay, I'll go on to the next position, the last position, where we're up in 12th and 13th position, starting with the C minor. So our pinky is going to be on the C at the 15th fret on the 5th string, and if you need to run that scale, you can go ahead and run that. Let's go ahead and play this one. So you're going to have 1 and 2 and ready and go and. Okay, we'll flip on over to page 192 and do number 25. We're in 6/8 time. We'll go 1 and 2 and Okay, let's do these melodies on page 193, starting with When the Curtains of Night Are Drawn Back by the Stars. So I'll give us 3, 1, and we'll be in on 2 and 3. 3, 1. And we'll do Divinity. I'll give us a 3-beat count in and we'll be in on 4 and. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we'll do number 28. Will the circle be unbroken? 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, and we'll look at Worried Man Blues. I'll give us a 3-beat count in. So you got 1, 2, 3. Okay, and we'll flip on over to page 194. We've got Drill Ye Terriers Drill. So we're going to have 1, 2, ready, and... Okay, we'll look at these double octave exercises. These are here so we can practice shifting. Like was explained in lessons 9, 10, and 11, there's lots of different ways to shift from position to position. You can use numbers 31, 32, and 33 for that. You could also practice and play exercises and songs from earlier in the lesson, play them in a position that wasn't specified for the purpose at the time, and then shift as needed to finger things better or to play the range that's needed. So if the range goes outside of whatever position you're in, then you got to shift to accommodate that range. That's what we do when we're playing music, but there's lots of different ways. I'm just going to do it one way. So starting here with number 31, we've got the E flat on the 6th fret of the 5th string. And we can shift up from there with our index finger, 1st fret, or 1st fret. On the 3rd string, I've got my 1st finger at the 8th fret. So I'm going to do this one that way. So you got 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, let's go over and do number 32, the Cowboy's Lament. Same thing. I'll give us 3, 1, 2, and we'll be in 3, 1, 2. Okay, and we'll do number 33, which is C minor, double octave exercise. So we've got a couple different ways that we could play this one. I'm just going to stick my index finger at the 3rd fret of the 5th string. We've got scale form 1, and then my index finger on that 3rd string at the 5th fret, we've got scale 1. So I'm going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Okay, and that wraps us up for this lesson. Of course, you can practice shifting between lots of different positions in lots of different ways. And of course, a lot of these exercises can be played more than once and at lots of different tempos, but that should help out with any of those. I hope you're having fun. Keep at it, take care, and we'll see you again. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. For help with other guitar playing skills, check out more of my method books and the numerous lessons available as part of my online academy here on YouTube. You can find more information about me and my products at kristenbromley.com. Take care.